Good evening. My name is Vicki Risco, and I'm a professor emerita, Vanderbilt University. I am so pleased to welcome you to our session tonight, hosting three brilliant poets. I welcome you to the Southern Book Festival on behalf of Humanities Tennessee, and for them, offer a thank you to the supporting sponsors, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, the Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Bookstore. If you're watching this session on Facebook Live or YouTube and you want to ask questions during the session, please do so. Our poets will respond and are eager to hear from you. Parnassus is our bookseller, and the purchases of books via Parnassus help to keep the Southern Festival Book Fair free. You will see book links for our sessions at the top of the chat columns. Also, the Southern Book Festival is free, a nonprofit event that is supported in part by donations from individuals. If you love the festival and these book talks, please support it by going to the app or the website www.humtn.org. And if we should lose connections, which sometimes happens with storms in the area, these disruptions will be very brief. We will be back right away, so stay with us. And now let's begin and meet our authors. Ashley Jones is one of our authors. You will be meeting in a moment, and her picture will be up. She is the Poet Laureate for Alabama, quite an honor. And she is the youngest and the first person of color chosen as a Poet Laureate for that state. Ashley is a faculty member in the Creative Writing Department of the Alabama School of Fine Arts. There's Ashley. She received a master's in fine arts and poetry from Florida International University. And her first poetry collection, called Magic City Gospel, which I love that title, won the silver medal in poetry in the 2017 Independent Publishers Book Awards. Magic City Gospel is described by its readers as a love song to Birmingham, the Magic City of the South. Her most recent book, Reparations Now, yes, code it up, wonderful, asks us for what is owed. Ashley Jones calls for long overdue reparations to the Black descendants of enslaved people in the United States of America. This is her third collection, and Ashley takes on the worst of today: state-sanctioned violence, pandemic-induced crises, and white silence. And all the while, as you're reading this, she's also uplifting Black joy. That's quite a talent to do both. These poems explore trauma, past and present, cultural and personal. There's the lynching of young, pregnant Mary Turner in 1918, the current white national political movement, a case of infidelity. But these poems, too, are a celebration of Black life and art, the beloved grandmother in rural Alabama, the music of James Brown and Al Green, and the soil where okra, pole beans, and collards thrive, thanks to her father's hands. By exploring the history of a nation, Ashley Jones holds us all accountable, asking us to see the truth, to make amends, and to honor one another. Our second poet is Chioma Urama, and I think her photo will be coming up, or live picture will be coming up in a moment. Chioma teaches creative writing and English composition at the University of New Orleans. Chioma is the author of A Body of Water, and I do have her book. Let's see if I can get it in here, Body of Water. And this book is the recipient of the Georgia Poetry Prize. She's a storyteller and a visual artist who tells us about her Igbo and African-American heritage living in the global South. Her written work is described as meditative, connecting people, patterns, and ideas in efforts to heal herself and the collective that we are. Her writing has been described as intuitive, intentional, and heart-connected. Chioma is a Benjamin Gilman International Scholarship alumna and a graduate of the University of Miami Masters of Fine Arts program, where she was a Michener Fellow. One reviewer of her work describes her poems this way, and this is by Jurowski, and it so captured what I was thinking when I was reading her poetry. Because the strength, he says, is that the communication occurs between poems. So when you read these poems, they go into each other, building on the former, making you think back on the previous one, what's to come next. And Jurowski describes the poetry as the constellation slowly emerging, where each poem becomes for the reader a different point on a map that marks the distances, the proximities between historical trauma and its intergenerational effects. Also very powerful. Our third poet is Crystal Wilkinson. Crystal Wilkinson is Kentucky's poet laureate, and she is the first person of color to be the poet laureate for the state, first person of color to be the poet laureate for the state. She's an award-winning author of Perfect Black, which I have, and The Birds of Opulence, Water Street, and Blackberries. She's a recipient of the O. Henry Prize, a 2020 U.S. Artist Fellowship, and a 2016 Ernest Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. Her short stories, her poems, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. Perfect Black is her most recent collection, and it's described by reviewers as a compelling collection of poetry and prose about girlhood, racism, and political awakening. As I read that, I felt the visual imagery of her growing up in Southern Appalachia. In Perfect Black, Crystal helps us think about topics such as motherhood, the politics of her Black body, lost fathers, mental illness, sexual abuse, and religion. Her conversations and her poems are about life, love, loss, and pain. And there are striking illustrations throughout that are provided by her longtime partner, Ronald Davis. Crystal Wilkinson is an associate professor at the University of Kentucky in the Department of English and in the program in African American and Africana Studies. Her poems are humorous, they're sad, and they're honest. She writes about her heritage, her childhood, and in many of her poems, she reminds us that she is country. Love that part. So wonderful to have the three of you here with us this evening. And now I'm going to ask each of you to read from your poetry for about 2 to 3, maybe 4 minutes at tops. And we'll start with Ashley.
Okay, thank you, Vicki. I'm so excited to read with Crystal and with Chioma. I wanted to read a pair of linked sonnets, and we will not go over our 4-minute time. And I wanted to read these because I have this really amazing memory reading these in front of Sister Sonia Sanchez. And maybe I'll tell the story in our discussion time, because again, trying to stay on task. But these sonnets talk about lynchings in the past and in our current moment. Mary Turner and Stephon Clark, whose lynchings were almost to the day 100 years apart. Mary, don't you weep, or Mary Turner resurrected. And there's an epigraph for both of them. When Mary Turner threatened to press charges for the wrongful lynching of her husband in Brooks County, Georgia on May 19, 1918, she was strung upside down. Her clothes were burned off and her unborn baby was cut from her womb and stomped to death. Turner was shot repeatedly, and she and her baby were buried close by their murder site. Like all resurrections, it began with blood, dirt, unending light. The Georgia moss punctuated by camellias, their white hurt stretching across Brooks County. No blight to stain their leaves, just the ash falling bloody from Mary's emblazoned womb. Her baby, a fire, its single soft cry still igniting the air. Could it be that even this baby, even this one-breathed angel was crucified to save us all? Maybe. Maybe Mary and her baby flew up from death in sweaty Georgia, her shallow grave shaken loose, finally free, resurrected. It turns out, all along, hell was earth. What else could she name that rock covered in leaf and loam, not loving, not hopeful, and most certainly not home? Stefan, don't you moan, or to serve and protect. 22-year-old father of two, Stefan Clark, was shot 20 times on March 19, 2018, by Sacramento police in his grandmother's backyard. The gun police claim to have seen him carrying was his iPhone. Is there a protocol for grace, for the moment between show us your hands and shoot? That night, policeman, servant of the gun, did you give space for a man's innocence to bloom? Despite the loaded weight of your finger on the trigger, despite how the night painted that man bigger, made him a giant with a fireball in his hands, despite the loud explosion of your fright, innocence is for softer things, an open, empty palm, a blooming flower, a spread of rocks becoming sand. Silly civilization, you thought we'd evolved beyond abuse of power, but again, a pruning. What a flower you were, Stefan, and what holiness in your body opening, petaled in the white helicopter light. In this, an Armageddon of bullets, flowers, stars, stripes. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. And we'll go back to that story you went to tell as well. Chioma, you're up next.
Hopefully you all can hear me. I just realized I was muted. But yeah, I just want to thank the team at UGA Press and the Southern Festival of Books. And I'm going to jump in and read from my collection, A Body of Water. I dreamt the poem that would save us all. A sestina of ultramarine children draped over a chain link fence, toes crushing vines flowering over the mesh, centipedes moving in locomotion along subtropical pines splayed towards the air like grasping hands. The little boy in two big overalls skewers you with his ballpoint blue eyes, says, spend more time in your body or someone else will. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. I have the words I need to heal myself. A name is a charm or medicine, a supplication imploring you to carry out the petition it calls. What the children's names mean. God knows God's love is a blessing, a gift. Chima. Oh, baby. God knows, God knows, God knows what he's done, and she's coming to get you. Chioma. Good God, God is good. God's love, a prayer of good luck and favor, and you, a carrier, a container for her. Ngozi. Ngozi is the blessing extended over us through prayer, and Ngozi is the house webbed with sunlight, and Ngozi is a fury of maddening sketches, flushing us each out of the deck like cards, and Ngozi is the welt of anger stretching down our throats when the coffee table comes down on her finger, so much blood it was stunning, and still she refuses to cry. Nkechi. Nkechi, Nkem, who is mine and not mine, who is ours and never ours, God's own, we are only borrowers, walks into the living room, calmly announcing that the house is on fire. Thank you.
Thank you, Chioma. Beautiful. And now, Crystal, if you'll read for us, please.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you all. I'm just going to read a little bit from Perfect Black. Terrain. The map of me can't be all hills and mountains, even though I've been country all my life. The twang in my voice has moved downhill to the flat land a time or two. My taste buds have exiled themselves from fried green tomatoes and rhubarb for goat milk and pine nuts. Still I return to old ground time and again, a homing blackbird destined to return. I am plain brown bag, oak and twig, mud pies and gut-wrenching gospel in the throats of old tobacco brown men. When my spine crooks even further toward my mother, I will continue to crave the bulbous tang of wild shallots, the familiar game of oxtails and kraut boiling in a cast-iron pot. I toe dive in all the rivers, seeking the whole of me, scout virtual African terrain, sifting through ancestral memories. But still, I'm called back home through hymns sung by stout black women in large hats and flowered dresses. You have to risk the briar bush to reach the sweet dark fruit, and ain't no country woman all church and piney woods. There is pluck and cayenne pepper, there is juke joint gyrations in the youngin' bearing girth of this belly and these supple hips. All roads lead me back across the waters of blood and breast milk, from ocean to river, to the lake, to the creek, to branch and stream, back to the sweet rain, to the cold water in the glass I drink when I thirst to know where I belong. Baptism. Flatwoods, Kentucky, 1972. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Imagine a girl, not yet trouble, dressed in a crisp white dress, black patent leather shoes and new white tights, pressed hair smelling of royal crown, bangs curled under glistening. He was the preacher, the Reverend William H. Mills, Jr. Long good hair, slicked back, pearl-handled cane, pocket watch chain dangling from a double-breasted suit. We stand in water up to our knees. The congregation reads scripture, eyes peeking between hymnals and Sunday hats. The Bible is handed to the deacon. I baptize you in the name of the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. See me submerged in cold creek water that seeps into my nostrils, tastes like danger in my mouth. I fight the hand of the preacher, come up gasping and crying. Bless her heart, she's feeling the Spirit, Sister Usher says under a heavenly hat. Everybody claps and commences to sing of being washed in the blood of the Lamb, but I didn't feel devotion. Felt wicked with my secrets. Wasn't even sure what the Holy Ghost was. See me with my legs closed and my skirt tail down. See me cover my knees. See me bless my food, and comfort was found in baptismal rewards. A bottle of orange knee-high, a sanctified fried chicken leg, corn pudding, and German chocolate cake. Let the church say amen. My full belly, the most sacred part. Thank you, and I'll stop there.
Wow, that was wonderful. It's so wonderful. As I listen to each of you, I'm revisiting what I've read, but I do have a question for all three of you to start us off with questions. And as we heard from your readings, all three of you write about your heritage and the history of enslavement in the United States, inviting us to understand your ancestors, the time period, the challenges our country has faced then and now. Very timely are these poems, your writings. So I read that Langston Hughes says that writers, especially Black writers, should help facilitate change in America. I'm a writer. I try to change it, help teachers. But you have such an important task of thinking about change in America, is what he's saying should come from your writing. And so I wonder if you agree with that, and do you have hope for change? Does that partly motivate your writing? And if so, how do you find your messages are received? Maybe social media, people that give you feedback. So there are multiple parts to the question, and I apologize, but I'm asking one, what motivates you to write about this very serious topic? Is it to affect change? And do you think that's happening in some small way or some large way?
Well, I think that I write to pay homage, I think, first of all. There's always a reaching back and a reaching forward sort of simultaneously. That African concept of Sankofa is always ever present in my fiction and ever present in the poems that I write. So I think that duality is what I've driven by, what has happened in the past, what we bring from the past, and what we bring forward. But what I find interesting, what I find painful, is that the same things that these young women are younger than me, but the same things that they're writing about now, that we all are writing about now, were the same things that Ntozake Shange, Audre Lorde, those women who came, who paved the way for us. So at times, if I'm honest, it feels hopeless. It at least feels like that we are churning the same ground over and over. If I can write a poem about Philando Castile's murder or someone else's murder, and I can look back and these are the same things that Ntozake was writing about and Gwendolyn Brooks was writing about. You could go back each decade all the way back, and I think we're still going in circles.
And while that's depressing, if we didn't have your contemporary voice, what a loss that would be, of forgetting perhaps of these cross-generational problems that continue to go forward. So the importance of your voice is quite striking.
Yeah,
Ashley.
and I think I definitely want to bounce off of what Crystal has just said. I too am thinking about that the past is the present is the future sort of idea. And ideally, there will be a time, and I'm not going to live to see it. I can say that very confidently. And I don't think any children I have will live to see it, or so on and so forth, where these things are not necessarily things that we can all pick up on and write about. I mean, the poems that I read, just thinking about Mary Turner and Stephon Clark having these horrible lynchings almost to the day, 100 years apart, that to me says, yes, we are speaking our truth. I feel like I'm, led by spirit to write, so I just write what is given to me. And this is the message, I guess, that is still needing to be given, because we are unfortunately so caught up in our country, in our society, in our world, with these progress narratives that we have not even gotten to the point of this is what happened. Like, we haven't even made it to let's acknowledge the things that we have done and that have been, happening for centuries.
Right.
So, I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad that I can walk in that legacy of all of our foremothers and forefathers, but I also am looking forward to when some, of my descendants, years and years and centuries from now, don't have to necessarily walk those exact same steps over and over and over again.
Chioma?
I think that's thank you for the question, Vicki. I think that's a really interesting question. Do we feel like we have the capability to create change? I think that has a lot to do with the intention in writing. And I write with the intent of healing myself first, because I know that through the work that I do on myself, I'll only be able to empower and heal others. So in that aspect, I feel like I have been able to create a lot of change, a lot of amazing change. And I look forward to seeing more growth and more change. And I have seen the way that that internal growth has affected the communities that I work within. And I'm so thankful for that. But when you asked that question, I also thought of the Toni Morrison interview where Toni Morrison is saying, I think white people have a serious problem and I need them to start thinking about what they are going to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very much where I am. I think it's time for white people to start thinking about this more seriously, thinking
Yes.
about the ability to change, thinking about the trajectory of change. Yeah.
We've been slow to do that, I'm afraid. What about social media? Do people write to you, react to you, say it's making a difference?
Yes. I mean, I think people react in many ways. And I think a lot of people are reacting to the education that they're getting from our work and work of others.
Yes.
There's, of course, people who react in a different way. There's always going to be those people who would rather us not talk about these things, or would rather us not even appear as proud Black women. I've definitely had people to say, why is it always about race? Why can't it be about it? Why can't we all just whatever? And it's like, well, until there's a day when I can't say, because of my race and because of my gender, someone can kill me and nothing will happen to them. Until that day happens, it's going to continue to be about that. And also, I hope my work is highlighting, kind of going back to what Chioma just said, the fact that me celebrating myself and my heritage is not the same as me saying your heritage is invalid and you're not a human being like I am. In fact, I think if we celebrate what makes us all different, that is actually how we, can start to fix, I guess, some of these problems. And that self-healing, I'll just underscore, that is so important. That for me is part of what reparations are. And a lot of that self-work does have to come from those who are descendants of our oppressors or who are actively oppressing us. That self-work has to happen with them because we already know what happened. It's happening, to us,
Right.
And now is the time for some deeper self-work from other communities.
Wow, that's really important. Don't know, Crystal, if you want to add to that, but
I think that social media has certainly helped to project the narrative in both wonderful ways and in horrible ways, right? So as far as that part of it, like I have received lots of interesting comments, some very soulful comments about my work and even about being Poet Laureate of the state. But I've also received some not so nice, not so hopeful and understanding comments about it too. And I think that's all I have to say. I think that Ashley and Chioma both said it wonderfully. And I think I too reach back to the past for self-healing. But I also think that for example, this particular book is about being a rural black girl. It was about my rural black girlhood. So I think for me in Kentucky, and then of course there's a ripple effect that I think that if I can write about my own experience, if I can write about the church, if I can write about sexual abuse, if I can write about some of these things that we don't talk about in our communities, if I can write about mental health, then I hope that means that the spine of a little black girl who might be reading this book is straighter, that she can stand in her own power much earlier than I did, that this book helps empower her, because in some ways telling the story and retelling my story has empowered me.
Yes. I can't see that doesn't happen all the time as readers read your works. So I'll kind of go forward with a couple of questions that I thought of for each of you, and perhaps Ashley, along the way, you'll take us back to your story that you wanted to elaborate on. But I'll start with Chioma. All of you actually are writing about and documenting oral histories, thinking back on, as you say, your history, generations before you, drawing on their life experiences. But Chioma, you make such a point of that in your poems, that you're speaking with an uncle or a grandmother. And I'm wondering, how did you hold these conversations? I know as we try to find our histories, they're fragmented, particularly a problem, I would think, with our history of enslavement. And so how did you frame this, to put it together, to hold these conversations with your ancestors, to make them sound so real? So I'm there with you. I understand this person. I would love to know this person.
Thank you for that question. That's such a beautiful question, and I don't know how to say it any more eloquently than I hear voices sometimes. And I'm sure that both Crystal and Ashley can attest to that. But for me, the writing process, it's a very present process. It happens all over the place. It happens as I'm walking. It happens in dreams. It happens in a park looking at a stream. Like the process is like it's very much about movement. It's very much about being in nature, and it's very much about connecting to the natural environment. And I don't like for me, I see death as a transition. I don't necessarily believe in the idea that these individuals are gone. I believe they're here in a different way. And so it's about, how do we collect that information? How do we enter these spaces? How do we come with enough reverence and respect to even begin to hold this conversation and hold space for them? And so that's the process that I go about that with.
It's interesting. I'm thinking in particular about one of your poems. You did on page 6 of your book, you did a Google search for your ancestor whose name is John Best, and you put in the words plantation and North Carolina.
Yes. Yeah.
Startling what you found. Startling.
Yeah, that was definitely a very painful one. I didn't even think about how common those words were. So then when I saw the return of the search results, I was pretty shocked to see. I was looking at it with a
Tell us a little bit about it, so everybody knows what we're referencing. So you put in John Best and you found things such as?
Yeah, so I put in the Google search for John Best, and I found a lot of search results coming back talking about how beautiful and great plantations were, how plantations were the best place to have a vacation stay. Just this really twisted narrative about plantations, and I was going in with a naive optimism that I might find this person, and what was returned to me were these really horrific search results. And so my thought was just to kind of arrange those in a way that conveys how much hurt how much hurt I found in doing that digging.
Yes, very telling. And Crystal, you too write about your ancestors growing up in the South, and you refer to yourself as I am country in several places. And earlier you read Terrain, which was one of the poems that I was thinking about. And then there's another one on being country. And yet as I read those, I felt that there was a pride and a longing for something that might be missing at the same time. It seemed as though there were lost opportunities that you're also talking about in your history and generations before you, their history. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, part of why I use that word so much is the reclamation of the word, to bring it out of the negative into the positive. Because, growing up, being country was a negative. It had negative connotations. It wasn't something that you wanted to aspire to, even though we all were. And so I believe in the possibility of nature being healing for Black people, and so particularly for Black women, for men too, but in my narratives particularly for Black women. So the idea of the reclamation of the word, for me, leads to the reclamation of the land. We went through a lot, but I think that if we can get to the point where bodies of water and trees and the nature is healing for us instead of frightening and triggering because of what our ancestors have gone through, that it'll be part of our healing process. So I do use that word country, and it has a lot of things behind it. It has a lot of weight behind it instead of just being the word. So that's part of what I'm doing. I think of my particular land that is no longer in my family, but from the native connections to the African connections, it's been in my family for more than 6 generations. So I'm thinking of country, of our country, the United States, but I'm also thinking of country as being rural spaces, and trying to reclaim the love of rural spaces for us.
Very helpful.
If that makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense. Very helpful. It relates to what Ashley writes about the South. And there's the one poem, All You All Really from Alabama. You're celebrating Alabama. There's a celebration for both of you. And Crystal, you just explained that so well in terms of country is more than the rural area. But Alabama, in your poetry, Ashley, they're a reference to the problems of slavery in the South. But it made me also think about the problem isn't just in the South. I think you're alluding to there are twin parts all over this nation. I wonder if you would talk a bit about that. There's so much symbolism there, it seems.
Yeah. I love that you said you all. I don't know if you're originally from the South. But
I lived in Nashville for 37 years, and now I'm in Florida, so it came with me.
yeah. But yeah, that poem, All Y'all Really from Alabama, it really came out of this lifelong frustration I feel like I've had. But this frustration came to a head when I was on tour for my second book. And I don't necessarily have a Southern accent most of the time. If I'm angry, maybe, but usually I don't have one. And so sometimes I would travel, to give a reading, and people would ask, "Oh, where are you coming from?" And I would say Alabama, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you all right?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, if you're all right, I'm all right, because we live in the same country, actually." It's not a different country. We did not, in fact, secede successfully. So, this idea that racism and discrimination is somehow boxed in to Alabama, Mississippi,
The South.
Georgia, the South, that's just not true. I mean, even if we go all the way back, this is part of what the poem is talking about. The whole country has always been at fault for all these things that happen. Yes, we were in the fields in the South, but who was benefiting off of the crops? What economy was built from this practice? The nation, not just the South, but the entire nation. And of course, there are so many other racist practices that are still happening all over the country. And I will say about the South, maybe others disagree, but I feel like as a Southerner, there's not really this idea that racism is non-existent that seems to happen in other parts of our country sometimes. Of course, we're not handling it perfectly, but from very early on, racism is a thing, and it's all the way in the laws, and it's in the water, it's in the trees, whatever. Well, not in the trees, but in our perception of it, or how trees have been used, et cetera, et cetera. And so the poem is attempting to show the reader that wherever they live is not exempt. Everyone is implicated. Right. Everybody's from Alabama, in that we are all in the same nation. We're all in the same boat. If you point out a problem in Alabama, you are pointing back at yourself, in fact, for that same problem. And then just kind of comically, I have a theory that everybody in America has a connection to Alabama. Somewhere in your family line or in your circle of influence, somebody's from there. And even if that person is me now, there's your connection. So, yeah.
I just sent a note, but I think we have about 3 more minutes, and I have many more questions. But I think I'm going to go to one of my last questions, and that is, because we have only 3 minutes, to have you sum up maybe your direction next, or the challenges you faced when writing these texts. Or Chioma, you're talking about love as a way to bring us together. So give us a minute or two of your thoughts about your work, where you're going, the challenges that you still face with your writing, in a minute.
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, I've been contemplating love a lot, and in the wake of the world getting still, last year, I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be loving. How do we become more compassionate with ourselves and with each other? And I think it's important that that's not something that we allow to get lost. And I think it's important that it's not something that we downplay in this time. And so that's something I've been contemplating a lot right now, and working on writing love poems.
So a new collection is coming.
Yes.
Ashley? Crystal?
Okay.
Well,
Ashley? You called my name. Unless, Crystal, do you want to go? Okay, so what am I working on? What am I working on? That's a great question. I'm working on surviving, first of all, into the next year. But I am writing essays now, so whatever that means, that's what I'm trying to do. Writing about craft, but also trying to write a memoir, which is a scary word, because that means like I've lived a life, or something. So that's what I'm working on. And now that I'm going to be Poet Laureate of Alabama, I'm really working on finding ways to spread poetry, or to at least highlight, let me say it that way. I don't want to come at it with a colonial mindset that I'm going to discover and like lift the people. No, they're already here, they're working. I just want to open up some doors and say, everybody else, look what's happening here. Come here, come to Alabama. We have so much to offer, including all this amazing poetry.
Okay. And Crystal?
I want to circle back to love just a little bit, but one of the things that I was thinking about today, and I tweeted about it, is that love and accountability can share the same space. Mm-hmm. I think that we can't forget the love, because the healing comes out of the love. at the same time we can hold people accountable. And I was thinking about what's going on in Texas, what's going on, it continues to go on in America. As far as my writing, I have found that each book leads to the next book in some ways. Perfect Black was hard for me to compile and write because many of the poems were older poems, so there was some compilation as well as some new writing. And so since I'm a fiction writer, one of my great joys as a fiction writer is to have these threads of truth that are sort of underneath the fiction, and then I pile fiction on, and it's sort of like my pleasure house, like, oh, I put these things in about me and nobody knows about it. But Perfect Black sort of feels like standing before the world nude in some ways, with being really vulnerable with the truth and my truth and the things that I've gone through. And so the next book is a culinary memoir. I'm going back through my matriarchal lineage, which one of my furthest ancestors was born in 1795, an enslaved child, and brought to Kentucky in 1808. So I'm starting sort of with her. She's weaved throughout the whole narrative, but it's a memoir about food and foodways in Appalachia that'll be out in 2023 called Prairie Song for the Kitchen Ghost.
Oh, wow, that'll be wonderful.
I'm ready to pre-order that today.
And the love that's expressed through food in the family.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we have more time. I was thought it was ending now, but it's not. We have about 15 more minutes, so I can go back to my questions. Chioma, in your book, you talk about your grandmother who was Igbo. It's a new, I don't know Igbo, and so I think, as I understood it, that there's a language that's lost. The Gullah language is what I was thinking of as I read about Igbo. It's because we have a great friend whose ancestors were Gullah, and she's maintained the language, but it is lost in so many areas. Tell us about your grandmother who was Igbo. And is the language lost? Are there customs that have been lost?
Yeah, so it's pronounced Igbo.
Oh,
and
sorry.
No, that's fine. And it's a nation in Nigeria. And so what I was working with a lot in this collection was that my mother is of African-American heritage and my father is of Igbo heritage. Their relationship dissolved. And so in that dissolution, I lost some of that. I felt disconnected from some of that Igbo family, right? Because I was raised by my mother who's African-American. And so a lot of that is me trying to reach over across the ocean and begin those conversations.
So difficult it's at times, I'm sure, to trace and put that all together, challenging. Crystal, in your book, you had a poem called The Water Witch on Reading. That was an interesting poem. Tell us about that. What inspired you to write that? Tell us a little bit about it first.
Yeah, so there are three Water Witch poems, sort of a suite of poems about the Water Witch on Reading. That's how new the book is. I can't even remember what the other two are. But they're from the voice of my grandfather. The Water Witch on Salvation, the Water Witch on Invasion, and the Water Witch on Reading. My grandfather was a water witch, which is a dowser. I don't know if anybody knows that term, but part of what he did, part of the sort of old ways that he practiced was he would get a branch from a peach tree and he would walk the land and tell people where the water was. So if someone was building a new house or if someone needed a cistern built out in the rural areas, he would say, well, dig here. This is where the water is. And so he was a water witch. Sort of along with that, he could remove a wart with a bean. He did all kinds of things with copper. So that's what all of those poems are about, sort of his abilities, but he could not read. He had a third grade education and could not read a book, but he was a mathematician. He was a wonder of a man. And because of his circumstances, he just wasn't educated. So all three of those poems are from his point of view. And he's really he's the primary male in the book, along with my father, who's absent.
It's a powerful poem. You describe him as, I can read a map, can read a man's eyes and see if he's truthful. I can level a girder by sight. I can read the tremble in a cow's gut, a man's footprints in the mud. I can read a man's heart to see if he's right with the Lord. I can read time by my own shadow. I can read the corners of Christine's mouth and tell her she's mad at me. Only thing I can't read is words. Really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of that is, as an educator, I think we get caught up in our profession, right? So, I'm a professor, but I certainly am no wiser than my grandfather. Mm-hmm. Less wise.
Yes.
Much less wise than he was, even though he only had a third grade education. So that's part of what that poem is speaking to.
Yes, I think we all think that. And Ashley, when you were reading from Reparations Now, you said there was another story you wanted to, or a reference to something else you would like to elaborate on. This is the time.
Okay, pressure. Well, the reason that I love reading those linked sonnets, I mean, they're a little difficult, of course, because of the nature of the lynchings that I describe. But I have this beautiful memory of going up to Maryland. I was very fortunate. Still can't believe this happened to me, but I was very fortunate to be selected as the Lucille Clifton Legacy Award winner in 2019 by Sister Sonia Sanchez, who is everything. She's, from Alabama, but known across the world. She's paved every way for all of us. So she selected me. So I went up to St. Mary's College of Maryland, where Lucille Clifton taught. Clifton is my favorite poet. I call her my patron saint of poetry. So I was there and I had to do some events with Sister Sonia. And at one of these events, I was to read a poem before Sister Sonia. And I'm not saying Sonia because I'm Southern. I just can't call her by her first name. That's makes no sense to me because she's an elder. So anyway, so Sister Sonia was going to read and I was going to kind of open for her. So I was very nervous. And so I read those two pieces because they were the newest that I had in my arsenal. And as I was reading, Sister Sonia was sitting in her chair. She's this tall, very, very small woman. And she was sitting in the chair with her eyes closed, just like this. And I can see it all so clearly. I was just nervously like, oh, I got to read this poem. And when I finished reading the poems, she said, with her eyes still closed, she said, and now you all see why I chose our dear sister to win this award. And I was like, well, all right, this is the end of my poetry career. I have reached the peak. This is it.
Wow. What an honor, really. What an honor.
Yes. I mean, talk about legacy. Like that whole experience really sort of reinvigorated me because I felt like, of course, Sister Sonia, who is a living ancestor, and Miss Lucille, who has passed on or made transition, to Chioma's point, to that word, her spirit was there sort of saying, keep doing this. You're doing the right thing. You are walking in your purpose. Go ahead and keep doing it. So yeah, that's why I like reading those poems because it brings back that memory.
And I think we write so many times to, as each of you said, we're educating ourselves. We're learning from our own writing. So you're not really looking for that tremendous feedback, but when it happens, there's that dialogue, that appreciation, the encouragement, the spirituality, really, of it all, the connectedness, as Chioma was saying earlier. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time now, so I'm wondering what it is that you would like me to ask you. How should we sum up this conversation? Well, what do you want to share with our audience before we sign off?
Well, I don't know about the audience, but I just want to say I'm very invigorated being here with you all, and I'm just so excited to be writing at the same time as you. I feel like that's such a gift, to be alive and writing with so many amazing Black women first and foremost. I mean, that just makes me feel so empowered every single day to see us all showing up to the page, because there are, to Crystal's earlier point, there are young people who need us to do the things that Sister Sonia, Sister Lucille, Sister Gwendolyn, all of them did for us.
Yes, and it's wonderful to think about that. When you were talking, like I could imagine them over your shoulders, both, even though Sister Sonia's still very much still here, but I could imagine Sister Lucille and Sister Sonia like standing over your shoulders while you write, and not in that sort of I don't know, braggadocious way, but I hope that we'll be standing over the shoulders of some young Black women as they strive to write or strive to be who they want to be in the world. And I think that's the height of accomplishment, right? To be able to pass it on.
And do you have mentoring groups among you? Do you have group opportunities to get together and write as groups, or to share your writing and process? Does that happen? Doesn't happen too much for educators, I must say, in my field, but I wish it happened more often. But poets, that seems as though that would be automatic.
Well, I have some sister friends that I write with and talk writing with. Nikki Finney's a good friend, and we get together still via Zoom now and phone, since we live in two different cities, but we talk writing. And I have to say that I fall in love with my students. I fall in love with all of them, but I think that at least every so often there's a magic in the air with my Black women students, or my students of color that are usually women, and the camaraderie that we have is kind of like what you're talking about, that's then carried out for years to come, like long after they graduate from the MFA program on into their lives. And that's very important to me, to keep those connections.
Yes, those connections are very important for them and for you, us, right? Chioma, what are you thinking?
About connecting in terms of writing?
That, as well as what would you want to share at the end of this conversation? What do you want us to take away from this conversation?
I feel like the world is moving through a lot of heartbreak right now. I'm personally moving through a lot of heartbreak, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think we as a collective, that's one of the things that we haven't really acknowledged, like that we are heartbroken, that people are heartbroken right now. And just sitting with the pain of that is so important. I think a lot of people are having trouble sitting with the pain of that right now. So we see a lot of people lashing out in very interesting and disturbing ways. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that heartbreak and take time to sit with that. And it doesn't mean that you have to make it into anything. I think there's sometimes, like for writers, this pressure. I need to turn this pain into something like good. I need to shift it. But just sitting with it is enough. And so that's what I'd like people to know.
Yes, and I guess that drives your writing, but it also drives you to new questions to address.
Definitely.
Well, I thank each of you. This has been wonderful. It's just been wonderful meeting each of you. I thank our audience for attending this session, and I want to remind our audience to remember to make purchases. We have 3 wonderful books that were just described: Reparations Now, Body of Water, Perfect Black. Go to Parnassus. There is a link on the chat link there to buy those books through Parnassus Booksellers. From the whole group at the Tennessee Southern Festival of Books, I thank each of you. I'm so thrilled and honored to have this opportunity to spend this hour with you. And I wish you well. And if you come to Southwest Florida, let me know. I would love to take you to lunch or dinner. My best wishes to each of you and to our audience. And we will sign off with good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. What'd you think? Did that go all right?